everybody hear me? Okay. All right, thanks for coming. I'm John McNamara. I know some of you, but not all of you. But we're grateful for you to come tonight. This open forum about our next week's referendum on the city charter is sponsored by the Great Progressive, which is a community online paper I'm involved in now that I hope you get to know and be supportive of. I'll put a pitch for that at the end, but I'm not going to ask you for money. You're going to hear from Don DeFronzo after I give a brief intro and introduction to the issues. But Don is a former mayor, former state senator, former DAS commissioner. What else have you done? Who's the Governor O'Neill endowed chair in public policy at Central, Connecticut. And so we're grateful to have him here to give his expertise. Somebody who sat in there. This is the fourth charter revision attempted over the last 22 years. There was a charter commission in 2000, in 2002, when I believe that's the year, had a very long and hard-fought battle to get ward representation on the council. It was won. Former Mayor O'Brien's here, he was on the council and was instrumental in making that happen. The reason a lot of us worked for that for so long was because everyone on the council seemed to live in 06052, as opposed to 06053 and 06051. But that also, the importance of that was that it ensured that the council looked like the city in terms of Hispanic representation, Black representation, and also you got a neighborhood representative on your council. So that is something that no matter what happens this year will not change. And but that took a long time to accomplish. And then there was another one in 2016 with a question, I believe two questions on the ballot. One was to make the mayoral term 4 years. That was defeated. And the other was sort of a multiple kind of changes, changing the way you receive your water bills, changing something about pensions, city employees. It was sort of a multifaceted question that the New Britain Herald actually editorialized against for some of the reasons we're going to talk about tonight. So that's a bit of a history of charter change over the last 22 years. So let me just start. Next Tuesday, voters will be asked two questions on amendments to the city charter. Like the state or federal constitution, the charter is the governing document for local government. I'd like to set the table and briefly for this discussion before we get into the content of these revisions by reviewing how we got here and how questions 2 and 3 that I will that are over there were put on the ballot. Having followed this issue since last winter, I've written 4 or 5 stories and analyses about the referendum since it was authorized in the New Britain Progressive. I want to compare and show you how other towns are presenting their charter changes and how they differ from what New Britain has done, to my right. Last winter, the mayor appointed a 5-member commission in January, I think, to come up with and consider recommendations. And the Common Council authorized the commission in late January. Then in March, the commission got going, established an agenda, and began a series of public hearings and meetings culminating in a report finished in May, sent to the council. And I was at the October 18th, the referendum committee supported yes on these issues at October 18th. How many folks were there for that? Okay, all right. And they answered questions for about an hour and a half, made a presentation, And those folks are there, many of them had some pushback about the issue I'm talking about now. What are the questions? And I just do want to point out that Sharon Boyne-Sevader was the chair of the commission. The commission held 11 meetings and public hearings from March through May. Minutes were published on the city website, and it was a transparent process where if people knew about it, they could have gone and weighed in on any changes they wanted or these particular changes that made it to the finish line. So that, I just want to make clear, the commission did not formulate the questions on the ballot. Unlike many boards and commissions, you don't see minutes, you don't see that all the time taking advantage of the city website. So as many of you know, the report recommended change of representation on the Common Council. All members from wards elected by minority representation, making the tax collector, or as it's called in the changes, the revenue collector, and the clerk a point of officers, and adding a COO, Chief Administrative Officer, to the mayor's office. And in addition, and these maybe have been overlooked a bit, it's merging the Board of Water Commissions and the Board of Public Works, or consolidating those operations somewhat, making the Director of Water Department a Deputy Director of Public Works, which is not insignificant either, and some gender neutral, some updating on the document in terms of bringing it up to the 21st century. So those are all things in there as well. There's also a provision requiring a charter commission be appointed at least once every 5 years. Actually, without that, we've had a commission every 5 years without that being in the charter, as I recounted the prior year charter commissions. In the report, the commission specified ballot questions, and if I had $1 million, it would have been blown up so you can all read it from where you're sitting. But the commission recommended 4 specific questions in their final report. One was what we're familiar with and which is on the ballot. Shall the Common Council be comprised of 15 members consisting of 3 members elected from each ward, 5 wards, by minority representation, which means the major parties will put out 2 candidates each, and the person that finishes last needs to rethink his or her campaign for the next time. The second question that the commission recommended was, shall the positions of revenue collector and clerk be changed from elected to civil service appointed positions? And in this case, the tax collector is every 2 years, the clerk is every 4 years. So if this passes, there will be no tax collector on the ballot in 2023. That's my reading of the change. And the clerk being every 4 years, that would take effect in 2025. And all the other changes would take effect next year that you're being asked to vote on. So on June, as I said, the commission sent their report. On June 21st, the council held a public hearing. And then on June 22nd, at its meeting, the council accepted all the recommendations, but did not accept these questions. What they did was, and this is the ballot, which I can't read from here, but anyway, we know all about question 1, the statewide for early voting, and I hope, how many are voting yes on 1? Good. Question 2 is the Common Council. That specifies what you're voting on. 15 members elected from the wards by minority representation. It's quite clear. And then question 3 is, shall the remainder of the changes to the city charter be recommended as recommended by the Charter Commission, be approved, yes or no. And so the issue of elector and clerk and the COO in the mayor's office, which is a dramatic change in governance for the city. And also those other changes I mentioned about have one every 5 years, put the water department director under the DPW, and consolidate that a bit. Those are all in this question that just asked you approve these recommendations. So that was the action by the council. We have a few councilors here tonight, I think, that I feel personally let the work of the commission, Charter Commission down, even though I don't agree with, may not agree with what they recommended, because as I mentioned, they did due diligence and were transparent in what they were proposing. So the council set those questions to be on the ballot at the end of June, not much time to do anything about it, and that's what you'll see next Tuesday on the ballot. All of these big issues on question 3. And state law says the city is obligated to provide clear information about the referendum. It requires the town city clerk to disseminate concise explanatory text or other printed material with respect to local proposals or questions. In each explanatory text says state law shall specify the intent and purpose of each proposal. Now, I talked to somebody who voted absentee and turned in their ballot, and there is a legal size, very small type explanation of everything in that. And also on July 19th, in our hometown daily, the New Britain Herald, how many songs? In a 2-page spread. And you remember the classified ads we used to look for jobs? Okay. The whole charter was there with no concise text, with cross-outs, and that was the published, legal published document about the charter in the daily newspaper. And I've looked at the City Hall website, and there's not much to be found. I found it in other towns. So I just want to move over here to these other ballots that you can't read from Manchester. So Manchester has 5 local questions on their charter, and they're quite specific. They are in line with what you saw for your common council change on our ballot, and they're specific enough. And of course the statewide one is number 1. But they ask things like an appropriation of $39 million for capital accounts. They actually get into revenue in some of their city issues. Shall the town eliminate the residency requirement for the superintendent of schools, chief of police, fire chief, director of public works, and the superintendent of... Well, if that passes and you want to go for those jobs, you'll have an opportunity. In other words, they're quite specific. In Bristol, it asks, shall the term of office of the mayor be increased 2 to 4 years, what we had 4 years ago? That's direct, specific. Shall elected or appointed officials who are convicted of a felony, fraudulent, that's an impeachment question. I guess they don't have it there. They don't have it in Washington either. And then a couple of other questions, and a final question that reflects what we have in question 3. Shall the technical revisions of the charter providing consistency of capitalization and terminology, which is what a housekeeping question is. A question that asks you to approve recommendations for which you don't know the content on the ballot. So these other towns, and there's a bunch of towns around the state that tend to follow this pattern. Notably, the town of Hamden, which is has a council makeup and a large council that's elected by minority representation in wards, Their charter commission recommended a CAO, Chief Operating Officer, in the mayor's office. That council and mayor threw it out. So it came from the commission. So, and I looked at their ballot, they have a general question too. But if you look at their website, they have a broadcast very loudly what all the issues are. I would be upset what they did. They put the extended mayoral term and didn't specify it on the ballot. So, you know, that's an issue I think that should be on. It was on the ballot in a big few years ago. But so the blowback I've heard since writing these things, and frankly from people who are for the changes, and mainly from people who are against the changes that know about them, they are upset about the way the commission's ballot questions were ignored. I talked to a former city official who said he was told by the mayor's chief of staff that it would not be good to have to flip over the ballot. There wasn't room for these questions on the ballot on one side. Apparently these other towns didn't encounter that problem. So I think two issues. The wording, in my opinion, the wording on the ballot, it doesn't give you the content you need to make a decision. You can argue that there was a publication. When you walk into the polls, there'll be a big poster in 6-point type with all these changes as you go to vote. That's my understanding. So it is a transparency issue and people having some knowledge of what they're voting for within the question. That's the pullback I've heard. Now I'd like to actually have questions after Don gives his presentation, unless somebody's burning up with a question about how this process is working. Remember what I said, the commission did its job with the agenda that was handed, transparent, minutes were published online, and every meeting there was a chance for the public to participate. When it got to the council in June, that all changed in terms of what you're going to see on the ballot in 6 days. Is it 6 days? Yeah, 6 days. So that's the process and how it worked, and that's the thing that people are going to go in and vote on. So hopefully this is all about spreading awareness of what's behind the questions. And also, we can devote the rest of the time to get to the content of these revisions and what they mean. And since that is above my pay grade, and I'll take any questions after Don finishes his presentation. Just ask that you don't have a prolonged statement, but make your point and ask your question within a minute or two, and then we can bring out any concerns or issues that you have. Without further ado, Don, take it away. And you can remain seated.
I will. Thank you. Thanks for your work, and thank you all for being here tonight. This is important. Business charter changes are important to local government. They are not housekeeping details, as one member of our city council claimed. These changes will be the foundations upon which future local government is built. So they deserve debate and discussion. Some changes in the charter should be in the charter, and others may not need to be in the charter. Quite frankly, I'm disappointed that the City Council and the Charter Commission didn't do more to inform the public and to encourage discussion about these issues. It's appalling that after several months of publicity, not one member of the 12 members, Republican members of the council who voted for these changes, not one member of the Charter Commission, not the mayor nor any of her staff, and not one member of the Vote Yes Committee have agreed to engage in a face-to-face debate on these issues. And I think their refusal to do so suggests that these proposals cannot stand up to public scrutiny. So we're going to talk about that tonight. I want to be clear that these are not partisan issues. For better or worse, if these proposals are approved, they're going to affect Republican and Democratic administrations in the future equally. So, you know, what happens, happens. John has done a good job of discussing the process. So I want to take some time now to look at the substantive issues involved by looking at the two ballot questions, as flawed as they might be. Okay. So, again, there are three ballot questions when you go to vote. The first one is a state constitutional issue. That has nothing to do with the city charter. Ballot questions 2 and 3 are the ones we're talking about tonight, okay? Ballot question 2, which is the first charter question, deals with the composition of the city council and minority representation. The method of electing council members has been a perennial issue in New Britain for 40 years. This question, as John has noted already, asks, should the Common Council be comprised of 15 members, consisting of 3 members elected from each of the 5 council districts, with the minority party requirements of the Connecticut General Assembly applying to each of the 5 council districts separately? So that's minority representation by district. Over the years, we have tried completely at-large elections. We have tried at-large with minority representation elections. We've had voting districts balanced by some at-large positions, and there's probably been a few other hybrids in there over the years. So there are arguments to be made for each of these and for this proposal as well, but I do think the element of guaranteed minority representation tied to some degree of neighborhood representation is important for a city like New Britain. Years ago, when we had at-large, only at-large representation, you would see a huge cluster of aldermanic representation from the west side of town. Literally 10, 12 of the 15 aldermen would live within a 4 or 5 block radius of each other. And that, I don't think is particularly healthy. So neighborhood representation is a good thing. But unlike the next ballot question we're going to discuss, the wording in this question does give voters sufficient information upon which they can determine their vote. So on this one, I think this is up to each individual voter. It's a fair question, and it's framed fairly, I think. Ballot question 3, which is the second charter question, is where the controversial issues have been hidden. And here's the wording, as John mentioned also. Shall the remainder of the changes to the city charter as recommended by the Charter Revision Commission be approved? No details, no information, no estimates of cost are provided. The average voter walking into the polling place, reading that question, will not know if there is a salary raise in there for the mayor, if the cemetery is going to be privatized, or if the water department is going to be sold off. You just don't know. Just go in and vote yes. That's what the council wants you to do, is go in and vote yes. You don't need to need that information. As examples John has presented from other towns, the New Britain question is clearly badly worded and should be, and really I think should be defeated solely on the basis of how it is structured and the disrespect it shows to New Britain voters. The voters should see the information, have the information, and then make their vote clear. Although not identified in the question itself, we now know that there are 3 entirely unrelated items or issues hidden in this one murky ballot proposal. So if approved, the changes would be 1, the elimination of the direct popular election of the town clerk and tax collector, giving the mayor the authority to appoint these positions. Secondly, a yes vote on this question would also create the position of chief operating officer, a position appointed by the mayor and who is responsible for day-to-day management of the city, basically the same responsibilities that the mayor currently has. And 3, finally, if approved, this question would merge the water department into the Department of Public Works. So we're going to talk about each of these elements as we go forward. I would just comment that I cannot see any good reason why these 3 separate and distinct issues should be merged into one question. Right? These should have been separate, as recommended by the Charter Commission, and they should have been in the context of information that would have informed the voter in making their decision. For whatever reason, the council opted not to do that, and I think you end up with a very poorly crafted question that deserves to be voted down. So let's look at the substance of the charter changes that have been submerged in this proposal. The first element removes from voters the power of directly electing the town clerk and tax collector, as has been done in New Britain for decades. Direct elections will be replaced by giving the current and future mayors the authority to appoint these positions, adding to the growing number of patronage positions in City Hall. So let's ask the question that I believe was neglected by the council. Why have these positions, like the town clerk position and tax collector position, been independently elected in the past? There must have been a reason for that, right? And there was. They are independently elected because they make decisions that are sensitive issues, like the town clerk makes decisions on elections, and the tax collector makes decisions on tax collection policies, which should be free of political influence. So they've been historically set up as independent agencies, independent decision making. So that would argue that these positions should not be under patronage at all. They should remain as independent. Now, that doesn't mean if you want to professionalize them, you couldn't professionalize them. You could do it differently. But the mayor shouldn't be making those appointments. Neither this mayor or the future mayor shouldn't be making those appointments. And interestingly enough, over the years, there have been very few complaints about the conduct of these elected officials, and the current incumbents have generally performed their duties fairly well. So it seems that the supporters of this proposal believe that increased patronage somehow translates into better professional management. And unfortunately, it doesn't. So do we really need this change and the additional level of appointed patronage and political influence it brings? Probably not. Moving on to the next question, and this is one where there's, I think, a lot of discussion. It has to do with the creation of a Chief Operations Officer, COO for short. This position will be created, again appointed by the mayor, again further increasing the number of patronage positions at City Hall. The COO will have the authority to run the city's day-to-day operations, powers which are currently assigned to the mayor. Despite that, however, there are no changes or reduction in the mayor's powers being proposed. So as a result, if approved, you're going to have two highly paid administrative positions with nearly identical responsibilities. This change would create a series of conflicts and operational questions. First question is, who is really in charge in the city if you have two people with comparable authority? Okay? The powers assigned to the COO are, again, virtually identical to the powers of the mayor. So how will this work, right? So a resident, as they have for years, calls the mayor's office with a complaint about a pothole. Mayor's office can't do anything about it anymore. That complaint, that resident's got to be referred over now to the COO's office, who will now take the complaint and presumably process it through to the Public Works Department for attention. This is a needless and confusing duplication of effort. Right now, you call the mayor's office and you get the same thing happen. So why are we creating this additional bureaucracy to attend to this issue? And the interchange is going to be complicated even further due to the role of the mayor's chief of staff, who currently does exactly what is anticipated the COO's office will do. If you call now and you talk to the chief of staff, who, by the way, gets paid $90,000 a year, that person routes the complaint to the proper agency and gets it taken care of, hopefully. Right? So again, you're now going to have the mayor, the chief of staff, and the CEO having responsibility for the administration of the city government, and as a result, day-to-day administration, which now squarely sits in the hands of one person, the mayor, will be fragmented into multiple positions, and you can ask what possibly could go wrong with that situation. Put that questions at the end, okay? Another conflict may exist when a department head is receiving conflicting directions from the mayor's office and the COO. Now, typically, I would agree that a department head would be responsive to the mayor. But under this new structure, knowing that the mayor's term is coming to an end, and that the CEO and the COO is an ongoing permanent position, that is, he's not going to leave, he or she's not going to leave office when the election takes place, the question of with whom will the department head side becomes a little bit more tricky. And so I don't think you can assume anymore that the department head would automatically be loyal to the mayor, because the mayor will be gone and the COO will remain. So it has a dynamic impact that needs to be considered. Okay. In many communities that opt for a COO or city manager, clear lines of authority are maintained and costs are contained by reducing the role of the mayor from a full-time to a part-time or ceremonial position. Now, I'm not suggesting we do that here, but in order to preserve the direct lines of authority and control, that's what other communities have done. This type of change would avoid the duplicative and confusing process that is now being proposed. The COO would be vested with primary administrative responsibility, and the mayor would become a part-time ceremonial job under this scenario. In addition, there are very few model charters, I actually have not seen any, that argue for both a strong mayor and a strong manager. That is a system that is very unusual to see in local government. And so, in any event, this question provides for neither of the options that I think would be workable. Instead, it proposes a strong mayor, strong manager, and the conflicts that it'll bring. And then there's another issue of it, and that is cost. The voters should know in advance of voting how much this new office of COO will cost. And some of these proposals here have cost, other cities have included a cost, an estimated cost. But you could argue with the cost, right? People will argue with, I estimated it will cost $500,000 a year to do this the right way. Now, people could argue with that, but it's going to be $300,000, $400,000, at least $250,000. I say $500,000. Because if you're going to hire a COO, that position is going to cost probably $150,000 a year. You're going to have to hire 2, 3, 4 professional staff to enable the COO to independently monitor city agencies that are all headed by individual department heads. And then, of course, there are the associated costs of travel, vehicles, and all that. So yeah, add all that up and add in a 40% fringe benefit cost, and you're well over $500,000. And if you're not going to staff it, appropriately and provide the professional staff to do it, it's not worth doing. So if you disagree with the cost estimate, you might as well not vote for the question either, because you're not going to get an effective solution. Supporters of the CEO position also claim that the position will provide a greater continuity in government when there's a change in the mayor's office. And unfortunately, I think this is not a valid claim. If you look around Connecticut after Election Day, municipal election day, the landscape, you can see the landscape is littered with the bodies of former town managers and city managers who have been fired or let go immediately following the election as the new administration comes in and replaces those individuals. And that argument about continuity is very, very unsound. Real real continuity in government is provided by mid-level career managers who stay in their jobs for 20 or 30 years and who are committed to the programs they run and operate. It has nothing to do with who the mayor is or who the COO might be. It's really a matter of the career commitment that people have made within the government. Okay. Again, another argument that's been made by supporters is that this new arrangement will give the mayor more time to think about policy. Undoubtedly it would, but for over 150 years in New Britain, and for hundreds of years in every community in the country, mayors have been able to do both jobs, that developing policy and administering the city. That was a job requirement when the incumbent mayor took the position almost 10 years ago. So what's changed? You know, what's changed? Again, I don't think there's any need for a strong full-time mayor and a strong full-time manager. It should be one or the other. What other implications does a strong mayor, strong manager have for New Britain? An issue that I've spent a lot of time studying over the years is the issue of crisis management in cities. And so what's happening here, as I said before, is you're now creating two almost co-equal positions in city government. The mayor, which has the same responsibilities as the COO will have. And there is no provision whatsoever in the proposed changes to make it clear who has operational authority in a true crisis condition. Right? So the confusion that could result from the omission of this specific guidance can be really a serious one. Is that you know, a department head, police chief could be getting contradictory advice or directions from the mayor's office, the mayor's chief of staff, or the COO. You all remember a couple months ago the unfortunate spectacle in Uvalde, Texas, where there were 400 armed police officers standing by, ready to act, but everybody was confused because there were 3 levels of police administration and no one knew exactly who was in control. Right? You had the state, the city, and the border patrol all involved, and nobody knew who was in control. People sat around for an interminable length of time, and the results were tragic. So crisis management demands the establishment of clear and unambiguous lines of authority. The current charter proposal creates nearly 2 co-equal positions, but fails to provide clarity about the operational authority in the event of a crisis condition. And I think in today's world, we all deserve to have that explicitly detailed. If it's going to be in the charter, there should be a very clear assignment of responsibility in that case. And then finally, we're getting to the end here. Most importantly, and I want to emphasize this, that there's no need to create the CEO position as a permanent charter position. That needs to be, you don't need a charter proposal to create this position. If this mayor or a future mayor wants a COO or a staff person with certain qualifications, you can do it by a simple motion. Create the position in the annual budget, create the specifications for the job. If this mayor wants to hire such a person, that could be fine. But why burden future administrations and the taxpayers with the additional cost? You know, the mayor thinks she needs that. Do it through the budget. If the next mayor comes in and says, you know, I think I can handle both ends of the job, I can do policy development and administration, he or she may not need it, so fine. But don't put it in the charter, because once it's in the charter, you can't get rid of it. And it hasn't even been tested yet. And then finally, just on this issue of the water department, I just want to make a quick comment on that. This hasn't gotten much attention, but the water department in New Britain was set up 150 years ago as an autonomous structure. Separate department. The city couldn't touch anything in the water department. You couldn't touch the revenues of the water department. It was totally separate. The industrialists at the time viewed the water department and the water it provided as the lifeblood of their industry, so they protected it. Right? So historically, it's been sacrosanct and autonomous. So I don't know, again, I don't know what the council was thinking. I haven't seen any justification for moving it, but it's now gonna be moved. It will no longer be an autonomous agency. It'll be part of the Public Works Department. I don't know what that means or what people have in mind for it, but that's a proposal that I think deserves a little more attention than to just be lumped in with these other issues and voted on. So, in conclusion, look, again, I want to appreciate you for being here and for taking the time to listen. We all want professional management in city government. We all know that city government changes periodically, but we don't need our untested ideas that create additional costs and grow the government and the bureaucracy in ways that we don't really need to have happen. So until a meaningful debate on these proposed charter changes and their impact can take place, I just think voters should simply say no thank you on question number 3. All right.
Thank you, Don. It's now it's your turn to ask questions, briefly, or raise any issues you've heard about. Okay, we'll get to you, sir. I just want to mention that, one more thing on the question itself. There are people, and until Don talked, I was receptive to having the tax collector professionalized in civil service. But if you are for one of those things, but against another, you don't have a choice. And so your vote is kind of disenfranchised as a result of just a too vague a question. But sir, go ahead.
I have basically a two-part question. Number one, the level of compensation for CEO. Has that been outlined? And secondly, every town I've seen, the level of compensation of a town manager is typically $150,000 plus significant benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, who's able to remove the CEO? What mechanism exists to remove the CEO? Can the town people, are they able to say yes or no, we need him out?
Well, actually, there's an amendment that you haven't heard about, or in those little 6-point, in the cross-outs and changes that were published. It says the chief COO may be removed from office for cause which shall not be political. Upon the recommendation of the mayor and the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the common council.
So only the town council.
2/3 of the common council and the mayor acting together.
The electorate itself has no say whatsoever, because that's a serious problem in many towns. The town manager is typically a political hack who brings in friends of the mayor and the whatever party happens to be the majority party.
It says here it's not to be political.
On your issue of the compensation, you're absolutely right. You know, a town manager position varies a bit depending on the size of the community they're running, but $150,000 to $180,000 a year is perfectly in line, and you're correct, there's usually a very sizable fringe benefit package associated with it. And no one's going to come in here as an individual and assume responsibility for monitoring whatever there is 12 or 15 city departments without an independent staff of his or her own. So that COO is going to hire additional professional staff, and that's how I get to my estimate of
Well, I know that because I've looked at several towns. The first thing is there's a town manager, then there's an assistant town manager, and then there's the secretary. And then, like I said, there's, how many people in this room know how much the mayor makes? How much?
The
Over 100,000.
Yeah, the mayor makes about $100,000, her salary was increased by 13%, actually a long overdue increase, considering there's a budget of $240 million. However, that was increased and now there's an escalator to make it go higher without the oversight the council once provided.
I've seen yes change to charter signs in people's yards, and I got a yes mailer a couple days ago. Is anything for no available or going out?
There are no on charter change, and voters should be hearing, I believe, the Democratic Town Committee in June voted to oppose both charter questions.
Okay.
So that will be forthcoming, although there's not much time left here.
Yeah, how does one help disseminate that view?
If you want to sign, why don't you just come up after the meeting, we'll take your address and we'll get one with you.
Okay.
Yeah, we have connections with the Democratic.
So I'm a new person to New Britain, and my thought naturally goes to the natural resource of water. And I just want to understand that if this becomes a deputy director position, do other things change in regards to how they might frame that resource? They might sell it in the future, they might farm it out, they might manage it, is it?
Never been tried here.
No.
Yeah, as I said before, it's been an autonomous agency for 150 years. So why is change contemplated? Why? I mean, it may be just pretty simple. They thought it would be an efficiency, instead of having two separate departments. I don't know. I have no idea. But those are the kinds of questions that you have to start asking when a change of this nature is made, because it's been done this way for 150 years, and it was done clearly to protect the resource. Well, why is it being changed now? I don't know. Maybe
What
we
they
could talk
say,
about the
if
council.
it ain't broken, why fix it?
Yeah, so, well, yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge subscriber to that, but yeah, I think in some cases you gotta ask that question, yeah.
This is going on all across the country. They're privatizing these water departments.
Yeah, the water issue, Alderman Lloyd.
I can speculate that because of the mismanagement of water bills, that a lot of residents have been getting $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 bills, water bills with no explanation, with no identity. So it might have to do with that, but just a speculation because the mayor doesn't tell us. I'm on the city council, so. But I want to bring up the question. I know the first question about changing the ward, and it's very helpful to know the history that we've tried all of them. But let me point out that certain things that make it difficult. It will make it almost impossible to have a 2/3 majority. With this, to get 10, that means that every ward will have to have two from one party to get a 10. To get 10 to override a veto by the mayor. And of course, no more than 10. And I think I've experienced my first when I first elected, we were 9 Democrats, then we became 6, then we became 3. Even with 9, we couldn't do anything substantial to override the veto. So I think this system now makes it, if we change that system, will make it then the power of the mayor almost absolute in that sense. That there won't be any possibility of veto. Very, very difficult to get 10. So that's number one. Another issue with minority representation, we do have now the school board. I was 6 years on the school board, and we have minority representation there for the whole city. The problem there is that, even worse, is that when you get nominated, you have a chance of 5 to 6 to get into the school board. So you're pretty much sure to be in the school board. Now, in this case, you will have a chance of 3 to 4. And I know people say there's a possibility of a third party, but I'm not seeing a third party really becoming prominent here in Britain, as opposed to, say, Hartford or others. So what it would mean is that if you get nominated by one of the parties, you have a chance of 3 to 4. 75%. And I don't call that really democracy in the sense that it's not a 50-50. Once you know that you have a 3/4 chance, you're less likely to go knock on doors and try to convince the voters to vote for you because you have a better chance than 50-50. So I see that first question as problematic as well. Given the opportunity, overall political system we have that always combines smaller and larger entities, whether it's a Senate and Congress, whether and state, they always combine the two. I think we have the right combination here as well. Some local and some at large.
Yeah, thank you, Aram. That was a great question. But well appreciated.
That there'll be patronage positions. I thought civil service was supposed to insulate people from being patronage jobs.
Does it say appointed on the ballot?
I think so.
Yes.
I think so.
Yes.
I
It says
understood it was
appointed.
civil
Yeah.
service like you said. Those aren't appointed.
And similarly, if the revenue collector and the town and city clerk being elected means that they're in some way responsive to the people, I'd like to know how many people in this room know what their platform was last time. What were they, on what basis were they elected? What were they saying they were gonna do?
What, I'm getting old, my memory. Well, they're candidates, they're elected by major parties, and they, can put forth ideas about, tax collector would be, I've heard ideas about improving technology, but they are accountable to the voters to come up with those platforms. Again, I could be, in Hartford, these are appointed positions as well. It goes both ways, but the question is, a candidate is as accountable to voters in terms of what they would do with their platforms. And that's what I've heard from tax collector candidates. And the same goes with the town clerk candidate. They can put forth how they modernize, how they keep up with things. Don?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to your first point about the insulation from civil service deal. Yeah, if these positions went through civil service and the question called for the Civil Service Commission to make the appointment, thereby insulating the position from mayoral selection, that would be up your alley, I think. That would say, now it's a civil service position, it's not patronage. Once the mayor gets involved in appointing a person, it becomes, who's that person loyal to?
I understand that. I was just looking at that wording and I couldn't make sense of it.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Oh, the wording on the ballot question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's either civil service or it's appointed.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the problem.
Okay. Well, you were for mayor, is the mayor given a list of people and can choose?
When it comes to department head, that's the way it works. You would get like the top 3 or the top 5, and then you would make a selection off of that, yeah. Now, when you have a new position, government works that if you have a new position, you can pretty much design the job qualifications for.
Yeah, the Yes Committee had their session October 18th, as I mentioned, and that was asked, couldn't the mayor create this position outside of the charter? And the answer is yes, but the answer back was, then it would be partisan. So, but when you elect the mayor, they got the votes, so they can form their own team. So that's, I think, what Don alluded to. Rosemary?
I have two concerns about this whole thing. One is the gentleman brought up the issue of water. I've always heard that there are two things that New Britain has that are really outstanding assets, and that is our water and our parks. It wouldn't be the first time that this mayor has tried to do something bad to our water assets. A few years ago, She tried to sell a well during the drought. She tried to get protected, watershed, rented out to people to do a mine, which would have destroyed it, and all, had many bad things come with it. And, you know, people rose up and had, you know, squashed it, but it took a lot of effort. But this is an asset that can be monetized, and if you're the queen, you can get away with it. So that's my concern about that aspect. I think she wants to do something evil with the water. And the other thing is, I don't know if there's any credence to this or not, but I've heard a lot of discussion about this matter. And one thing that I keep hearing, and again, this could be complete imagination from people that are saying it, but this mayor has been there for 10 years. There is concern, people are talking about the possibility that she wants this position eventually. She wants this COO position herself. She could then continue to run the city permanently. And guess what? She wouldn't have to bother running for office. She wouldn't have to bother being nice to people and shaking hands and going into the all the time. She could just collect the big bucks and keep running the city, and whatever else that entails that benefits her. I don't know if there's any kind of credence to that.
Well,
but it is a thought,
Oh, all right.
how this is gonna go.
Well, actually, it is set up that these are an appointment of 4 years, which overlaps mayoral administrations. And she'll be a full-time employee who's responsible for daily management and so that appointment under the rules of civil service is Don described. And that's how the appointments would run. So it is minimally a 4-year appointment. And this is an amendment.
Similar to superintendent of schools position. You can get rid of them, you gotta pay them, but.
Contract, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
that's right.
kind of thing.
Correct.
Yeah, you can probably follow that model.
And as Don mentioned, and I don't argue with that, it is equivalent to what the school superintendent makes. I think it could be even higher than $150,000 in the $200,000 range. Again, we have a budget of $242 million, but yes, it would work similarly.
I had another question. Would you have any idea, how a third party would be handled on, I guess it's question 2. If someone had, 2 endorsements, say, the working party, the working families party, and another party, could they?
I can go in and vote for the working families of the Democrats, but only one vote will count.
Right, but as far as the 2 people out of 3, does that open a door for someone else, you know?
Sure.
They decide they really am with the working parties, so 2 other Democrats.
So you have John McNamara and Don DeFronzo on, say, one line, and you have Willie Pabone and Frank Smith on the second line, and then you got 2 working party candidates on the third line. If the working party candidates, or either one of them, outpolls, or ends up in the top 3, that person gets
Let's
elected.
say that while you were on the top line, you were also an endorsed candidate for the working party, or working families party,
So I think
and you won.
One would cancel each other out, because if I went in and voted for Don as a working families guy and a Democratic guy, that ballot would only reflect one vote. Is that your question?
I'm just trying to figure out how minority.
But a third party could be elected,
Candidate
yes.
could get in there.
Yeah, a third, yeah,
I mean, to
definitely.
me,
It's
it
happened
seems
in
like
Hartford,
that's
it's happened in Hartford with the Green Party in Hartford, right?
Working families party.
Working families party. Yeah, so if the,
I mean,
if a minority party finishes in the
seems
top
like it would
3.
be exactly what you're looking for when you're looking at the ranked ballot.
Ranked choice voting.
Right. idea what you wanna do on those, on the wards? If you're gonna do that,
Don, Mr.
I
Nate?
guess, on the water department,
You're an expert on the water.
I thought that the reorganization of 2012 that Tim O'Brien did merged the water department into public works. That was one of the things in City Hall where they combined the whole 19 departments into 5 or 6. And that was one of the changes that was made then. They still kept their finances separate, because that's a really touchy issue. I think what this gentleman was asking, back to the other question, if somebody voted for you, you're on both usually. And would that vote take away, from the Dem vote when they added them up? Right now, it's the same name and they just add them in.
No, it does, you talk to, Lucian or Mr. Gostin, you cannot have your vote counted twice.
No, it wouldn't count twice, but you, instead of voting for the Democrat DeFronzo, you voted for the Working Party DeFronzo, Working Families Party.
The individual,
You only voted once.
yeah.
Okay,
The
yeah.
individual wins, and then the individual can then determine whether he's a Democrat or a working party.
Okay, so that counts either way.
Yeah, you can go either way.
It gets
is
complicated.
that laid out?
Hmm?
Is that
I think
laid out?
that's the state statute.
That's the way it's
The
done.
way
now.
rep was,
Yeah, state statute.
that would be fine. Any other, we got the gentleman over there, and then we'll get the folks on, over there. Yes, sir.
Okay, the mayor is a 2-year term, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the mayor gets to pick whoever they want for COO, tax collector, and the town clerk, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, if the mayor doesn't get reelected, you said these people are in for 4 years, so now the next mayor that comes in doesn't have the option to hire, to appoint whoever they want to appoint, right?
Yes. If the collector would be, they are mayoral appointees.
Say it again?
Mayoral appointees.
Yeah, but I mean, but they're in for 4 years, you said.
Yes.
So the next mayor, if that mayor didn't get reelected, the next mayor wouldn't be able to pick those, the people they wanted for COO, the tax collector.
Yeah, not for the next cycle, right?
But if they didn't get reelected.
And it sets up, as this gentleman alluded to, that if I want my own person in there, I'm probably gonna have to negotiate the incumbent COO out of the office. I'm gonna have to pay off somebody.
Here again,
Right.
we're gonna pay for it.
But everybody.
Yeah.
Mr. Davis?
Yeah, thanks for this session, first of all, and it brought a lot of clarity to this question, the charter, that I didn't have before. And a number of people have contacted me about those questions, and, I just gave them the blanket, vote yes for the first one and no for the other one. But I didn't give them the rationale why. I said because, besides it's confusing. But now that you broke it down, is there a way that, we as a people can block that question from being on the ballot? There's no way at all.
A woman in the back, and then I'll get to you.
All right, so my question follows directly from this one. I think it's reasonable at this point that it may pass despite our misgivings. And given the ambiguity of the wording, I cannot believe for a moment that it passes muster with the requirements of the state for an issue on the ballot. And what I would like to know is what are the prospects for getting rid of it after the fact, if it comes to that?
Well, in practical terms, if you vote no, you'll get rid of it. And that prevails. If not, I remember the provision to make, you gotta take a look at the charter every 5 years. You can take a look at the charter next year. There's nothing that precludes that in terms of that. But the issue I raised was the concise notification of voters. And in one of the stories, I did cite the state statute governing local town referenda. And that would have to be looked at to see if it is after the fact. I'd have to say that there must be a timeline to challenge something like that. But again, the council acted in the end of June, and there was very little time. They received the report in May after the charter commission process. But it is something that could be looked at. But what's right in front of you now is, this is on the ballot, creating awareness of what the content of these revisions would do. Mr. Simpson, go ahead.
So, this question kind of stems from the gentleman in the maroon hat there. Is there language in the recommended changes of the city charter that ensures that if you're registered as one party but endorsed by another, if you get elected, you will be counted as somebody representing the party you've been endorsed by? For example, like, we have Democrats that run on the Republican ticket, right? So if those people run for city council and they get elected, is there language ensuring that they would be counted as Republican older people or Democratic older people?
No, that.
Republicans in the state statute.
It's in the state statute.
That isn't addressed in either. These issues are in the charter as a whole, and actually, as far as I know, there might be a state statute with regard to that, but no.
It's listed as now on the official list because it came up, I was one of them. It says Republican caucus now, next to people who aren't registered Rs. So those things,
Well,
on the list that they put out of all the council members. If
You're
it's somebody
correct
who-
on, but actually a Democrat elected on the Republican slate is a Republican elected official,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Have you become a Democrat, Don, or you're?
No, I was never a Republican either, right? I was told that the rules then was, I had a choice to, as unaffiliated, when I came in to pick what caucus I wanted to go with, as long as they would have me.
Well,
But
you-
I never pushed that.
Minority representation.
I know there's a few more questions. What was
John.
next?
I would say, I believe there's some, if people are interested, there are some vote no signs, if you wish to take one on the way out.
Ms. Lonnie?
I was just wondering if you could flesh out, because I got confused right now, and this is interesting to me as far as the council makeup, minority representation, and what it takes to override a strong mayor's veto. So currently, it's 10, right?
Correct.
And currently, and hypothetically, you can get all of one party on council, right? There's no minority representation right now, right?
No.
Could there be 15 Republicans?
Yeah.
Hypothetically. So to me, it's always interesting to think about that versus if you move to all wards with minority representation, you'll always have 5 and 10, right? So in if one party sweeps, 5 have to go to the opposing party. Minimum, yes, right. Whereas now, there's no minimum, so it could be just a sweep. So that's something to consider as far as power balances on your council. And then, it's still the same, so I got confused by you, because it's still 10 as far as what you need to override mayoral veto. So I'm confused, in a sense, how do we think about that? Like, what, as far as, to me, what's most equitable as far as what you want? If you have, make up your council, and if you have minority representation, what do you think is fair for overriding a strong mayor's veto? Should it be majority? Should it be simple majority? But then it's gonna be complicated if you have, minority representation, because it's always gonna be.
Legislatures historically, I think, are the 2/3 to override, and that would be the case, correct, Alderman Ilon? Yeah, that would. My preference, I went to high school, grew up in Lynn, Massachusetts. You got at-large wards; they'll never change. Seems to have worked out. So
Bill, when you were on the council, was it all Democrat?
No, we had the minority, we always had 5 Republicans.
You did, okay.
Yeah, under the minority representation law. Who else? Yes.
It's a side question, but a lot of communities are concerned about violence at polls. We're a very mild community here, but are provisions being made for security at each of our polling stations?
I don't think it's gonna be an issue,
I hope not.
to be honest with you.
It's not
Unless,
in Connecticut either, so.
unless Willie Pavone shows up at
A muscle.
They'll be handing out water.
I really don't know.
I think the acting secretary of the state has issued a big statement about that as far as Connecticut is concerned. I think you're hearing things in the mass media about armed
Yeah.
vigilantes hanging out at drop boxes.
And photo plates.
And a judge and also a judge, as if this had to happen, barred people from taking photos of people's ballots and essentially the destabilizing forces that are, I don't think that's an issue here in Britain. Unanimity with that. There will be poll watchers from various parties. And but they have to be authorized.
The behavior seems infectious, that's my only concern.
Yeah, well, it's a concern, yeah. Go ahead.
On question number 1, did they set, is there anything in there about how far in advance balloting would go?
No, that's interesting, we're talking about the city charter ref, but
Right.
this is the first step to change the Connecticut Constitution.
Yeah.
And there's a rule in the Constitution that says you've got to show up and be present to vote in the 17th century. However,
They get the time off.
That was in there to keep a lot of people
but the
out.
legislature will then have to set the time. In Michigan, they started September 23rd, you could go vote.
Okay, so
But
there's
most of
nothing
it's
in
come-
this
it's-
that says any idea of what they've got in mind?
You don't know.
No, that would be determined by legislative action later on. We'll talk to Senator Lawrence about that. Yeah, but I don't know, we've never had it because, we're one of the very few states that has our absentee ballot provisions in the Constitution. And as I mentioned earlier, once something's in the Constitution or in the city charter, it's almost impossible to get out. We've tried getting this out before and have not been successful, so it's another attempt.
Yeah, this time, the wording of the question killed it in 2014. I think the question is clearer to people, the issue we've been talking about, these charter questions. More comments or questions? We're about 15 minutes more, if anybody has any. No. Yes, Ann.
So far as what time period the legislature will put in for early voting, that is partly up to the legislators, but they are usually interested in hearing from us. So if you have an opinion on how long a period would be healthy for us to have early voting in Connecticut, talk to your legislator.
And
I'm all over.
That's the same question.
the same, okay.
Yeah, I was wondering when it would start.
That's a good point.
Did you say that, if these go down, that, the next voting, process, they can come up again? I mean, the, charter
Yeah.
revisions can be.
Any year, yeah, it could be revisited.
Not every 5 years, I mean.
No, that's why I think that the sentiment might have been good, the intent, but you need that in the charter too, because, as I said, historically, it's happened every 5 or 6 years over time.
Right.
May I add that in order to revisit the charter, you need 2/3.
Two-thirds, correct, and I've been involved in petitioning to get a charter change, so that ward system, where it was so onerous, you got 2,500 signatures, if you got them, it could come back to council, they could reject it, you'd have to go out all over again and get the petition again, at least that's the way it worked, and I was involved in trying to get a ward system. But, Lynette?
I have two questions. One is about the director of the water department, just this part of the, it's not on the question, I mean, it's all lumped into this amorphous blob that is question 3. That it's so toxic, I just can't get over it, I'm overwhelmed. That this is in front of the people and gives them no idea about what they're voting on. But this one bothers me specifically because I'm very interested in protecting our water supply and
Yes.
making sure it's there for everybody as it has been. But things might change with that, just naturally. But the director of the water department title will change to deputy director of public works utilities. Does that one statement indicate the merging of the water department or the submerging of the water department under public works?
The water department director, Ray Esponda, becomes an assistant director of public works.
So that means the department shifts into, under the direction of public works.
It may.
That one statement does that in the charter change.
Well, Don's alluded to the history of our water department. There have been runs, I think Rosemary alluded to, by 2 Mayor Stewarts, Tim Stewart and Aaron Stewart, to sell the Patton Brook well, to lease 40 acres to Hill Pond, or Trap Rock strip mining of watershed. And the watershed is one of the cherished assets. It's speculation on why this is on the ballot, but it could move the decision-making over to Public Works Department. I don't know for sure.
And the mayor.
The other question has to do with the at-large positions. Could we have avoided this imbalance by the political parties themselves or somebody who oversees the elections, making it a rule that the 5 at-large candidates had to be from 5 different wards?
Well, then they at-large, well, the at-large system, there was wards earlier in the 20th century, and then they went back at-large. And the power structure of the town, Democrats and Republicans liked the at-large system that excluded people of color, Hispanics, from getting elected. I live in Ward 3. When that changed, my representatives were black and Hispanic on the council, because that's who lives there. That's why the ward system, at least if there's any saving grace, despite the problems that Ilona has alluded to with it, and I have problems with it too, it would preserve a ward system. I think Marie and then Bill. Marie behind you.
Yeah, I've got a question. Besides the implications of the COO and all the funding that would be necessary to do that we don't have a right to vote on except to deny this question. What are going to be the implications of merging Public Works and the Water Department? I mean, we've now seen the merging of, there used to be a director of public safety that was just over the 911 center. And now that director does the IT people, the dispatchers, and the janitors. Now, the dispatchers clean up a lot of shit, but you know. So they've merged these departments to save money, and the last director we had no idea what was going on in dispatch. I wonder if that's going to happen also with merging Public Works and the Water Department. Are we going to lose jobs, or is it going to be a significant shift in how things are run?
You probably would, I guess, be great leeway. I don't know if that's Don has a question.
Yeah, I don't know what the game plan is, but obviously, from your experience, anything is possible now. I mean, once it's merged under Public Works, it can become, primarily a Public Works position rather than a water department.
And is it going to change the salaries or eliminate positions?
The water department has its own board, so they still keep the board in the.
They meet second Wednesdays of the month up at the.
And I think the finances are locked in separate.
Okay.
I do have two questions. One is, if it passes as is, when would it take effect?
January.
This January?
Yes.
all of them?
Yes. The town clerk would be 2025, because he was elected last year for 4 years.
Okay. And I'm assuming, maybe I shouldn't, that if they do pass, that in order to get clarity on what their positions are gonna do and what their roles are gonna be, there's gonna have to be some commissions that are gonna have to, like the Civil Service Commission, that's gonna have to put some language together, which would give people an opportunity to go to the hearings and be heard, correct?
I would think so. Yeah, I'm not sure what they do these days, but, yeah, and that's where the political influence can come to bear too. I mean, if there are certain characteristics or qualifications that the mayor prefers, you can be sure that those will be incorporated into the job description, because the person's gonna be working hand in hand with the mayor, hopefully, not opposition to it, but, yeah, so you really don't know. You would think that would be the case, but I really don't know how that would play
There's
out.
nothing
Yes, sir,
in
I
the wording that says that, that's worth pointing out. Nothing in the wording says how those things will be implemented.
That's right, and sir, I don't think you've got a chance.
So you're Mr. McNamara, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the past mayors, very intimate, really.
Yes.
This mayor, you wanna get a manager in there,
By the way, I was not the former mayor. I was not.
Just another.
you wanna get a manager in there as this mayor. Is there a question of competency? She can't do her own job? Why she need a manager?
After 10 years.
I
What the job
would
was.
just
Here's the question, other mayors have been there, okay,
Well, I think, as Mr. DeFronzo pointed out, she could create a position like that just by resolution. She has votes on the council to do it.
okay. Second part of that question is, if you're gonna put this manager in there, is there gonna be both, how's this manager gonna come in? Is gonna question his credentials? Are you gonna vote him in, or is he just gonna be appointed? I'm gonna pick him out of a hat.
I can read you the credentials.
Somebody's gonna pick him out and he's gonna be it.
The qualifications have a master's degree in public administration and business administration.
Doesn't have to be he.
Is this gonna go out in the paper, or is it gonna be a functional?
It would be posted. Coincidentally, Mayor Stewart apparently is studying now or has earned her MPA at the University of New Haven while she's been mayor.
So she's not an MBA?
No, she did point out in her first op-ed about the issue.
We're questioning her credentials now too.
Yeah, well, she has a bachelor's in public administration from Central. But she pointed out that no mayor had ever had an MPA.
I'm not looking at the mayors.
Yeah.
I'm just asking credentials right now. If you're gonna pick somebody out to be a manager, okay, is that gonna go out globally? You're gonna ask for somebody, or are you just gonna appoint somebody, hey, he's gonna be a manager? I got a cousin here.
Well, if you got a cousin with an MBA?
I got a PhD. No, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I'm just asking how that's gonna happen. Mr. DeFronzo's been in this a long time, he knows all the people I know.
Sure.
Yeah, well, I think the way it's worded here, it would have to go through the civil service process, but that can be very nebulous. I mean, you could play with the job descriptions, as I said before, if the mayor is looking for certain qualifications, certain characteristics, they could have that put into the job description. Then when the last, number of candidates are selected, whether it's 3 or 5, then the mayor makes the decision. So if DeFronzo makes it into the list, then it's fair game. So my thought is, if you're really gonna do this, to insulate it from politics, the Civil Service Commission should make the appointment and not the mayor. And that would be the insulation.
That's my question, am I asking, is the mayor gonna do it, or are you gonna go civil service? How is it gonna be competitive?
Mayoral appointees.
It's gonna be, in the end, it's gonna be an appointee.
Mayoral appointment. Okay, so you took civil service out, didn't it?
Well, they call it a civil service process, but in this system, the mayor picks the.
And back with this gentleman was saying
back and forth
before, it's almost what do you call that?
how tall is
You're not answering my question.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time I didn't answer anybody's question. But he's the expert on that. Can we go to?
Mr. DeFronzo's smart, I agree.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Marie's friend. I worked with her, been a dispatcher for almost 25 years. And just to clarify, in the civil service, on her old director, depending on who you want to hire and how it went, he would change the weighting for the testing and requirements. So it could be 100% test, it could be 50% experience, it could be, it's varied over the last 25 years. So like I said, you can,
Could be a written
well, it
test
could
or it
be
could be
whoever you,
interview.
and the mayor actually, so whichever mayor is in office, doesn't matter which one, has a lot of say,
Sure,
in one way or another, as to who gets hired.
Well, I think in answer to your question, as Don pointed out, if the Civil Service Commission did the hiring and not the mayor, it would be the civil service as we've come to understand it.
I was agreeing with Tim, but you brought up the appointment, she's gonna appoint it, that's why I go back to the front. Okay, no, you're cool, no problem.
Well, yeah, you and then.
I wanted to know what other appointed positions are there currently, or is this a completely new precedent for the, collector of taxes, city clerk? I mean, are there any other appointed staff positions currently in the city government?
All the staff in the mayor's office is appointed. There is a, I think now there were a couple of other, maybe Tim, other appointed officials in the city. All the staff,
Corporation Council.
all the staff, the corporation council's appointed, the corporation council's appointed, the city's chief attorney's appointed. What else is there?
Well, charter changes tended to give the mayor more power, the last couple of charter changes, except for the instituting award system. I see former Alderman Anderson there was a budget fiend, do you know?
Yeah, there are some special projects positions that are in various departments, so it's not just the mayor's office. There are a couple of other positions that are sort of hidden around the city budget that are appointed, but they tend to be, except for, chief of staff, right, they tend to be, sub $100,000 positions where the chief operating officer, by nature of the position, would be 100.
And what's happening, I mean, we can look at, how many developmental dollars funneling in to the mayor, who's, you've seen downtown, there's a lot of money on the line. And so, to me, that's one of the things to answer, like, why is it being done in this weird way, duplicitous, doesn't make sense, not enough information. But there's also, we also have to contextualize it, like, there's big development money that are going to one specific person to engineer huge projects.
Yeah, and again, it looks like a positive, to have cranes in the air. On the other hand, is a 26-year tax break.
Wow. Right.
In every case, is what is being made there. So you're gonna measure development, positive, good, grand list versus John Q. homeowner and who will not get any kind of 26-year tax break. But that will be played out when we know more. But we're right at 7:30, unless there's one more burning question. But we hope you, Rosemary, for the last question.
Okay, I just want to remind everybody, who appoints that Civil Service Commission? The Civil Service Commission that we were counting on, that would democratize this. The mayor appoints everybody. And in the last 20 years of Stewart reign, the Democrats that she appoints, we don't even know them. They don't come to any meetings. They don't communicate with the Democratic Party.
Rosemary's a member of the Democratic Town Committee. Yeah, they
So,
usually.
they're fake Democrats, I'm sorry, or they're just registered nominal. They're people that
All
are
right.
registered.
Well, I want to thank you. Give you also a hand. One more little thing. Remember I said that there were 11 Charter Commission hearings and meetings, but the Herald, the Current, the newspapers that we used to, legacy papers we used to rely on for information, it's not done anymore, meetings aren't covered, so that accounts for a lot. I'm just saying this is a local news project, the Progressive, you can scan with your phone, check the website out, use it to voice your opinion, but we are trying to provide coverage, and it's also on the agenda as well. We're trying to provide coverage of local government, so people won't be in the dark. And so we encourage you to write to it.